This is the 152nd Security Thought Leadership webinar. And we come here every week where we discuss a topic of significance to the security sector. And the object of what we're doing is to analyze today, critique today, so we get a better type of security tomorrow. That's the idea of thought leadership. We're not trying to solve the world's problems. We're trying to understand what the issues are and think about how they might be challenged, overcome, knocked down, however is appropriate. And this week, the topic is one that is an important one for the future of the security sector. Do we really care about young security professionals? Now, I know there's lots of good schemes out there that offer excellent support. The question is, as a sector, as an industry, is it as good as it sometimes is spoken about? Because if you think about it, it's not as if people in school sit there and say, I want to join the security sector, even though they might say that about the military or police, for example. So today I've invited three panelists who are going to be offering their views, all in the different ways of around the young professional network. So in a minute, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Once I've done that, I'm going to ask of each of them to make an opening statement, 3 minutes, where they get to say what they think about the subject matter. And after that, we'll come to you, the audience, for questions. Can I invite you, please, to use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll endeavour to incorporate your question in the ensuing discussion. Try and get your question in early, and we'll try and incorporate it. Without further ado, then, let's go and meet our panellists today. And first of all, let's go to Richard. Richard, can you please introduce yourself?
Yep, thank you, Martin. So lovely to meet you all. Richard Brooks. I am the current Director of Young Professionals for the ASIS UK chapter. ASIS is one of the world's most famous global membership organisations, and the UK chapter is the largest outside of North America. So I'm working very closely with young professionals across the security spectrum. In my day job, I am the Regional Security and Safety Manager for Northern Europe, working for Louis Vuitton. And I'd say I've been in the industry for about 12 to 13 years.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that. Let's go to Ben. Ben, over in Seattle, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Professor Gill, for the invite. My name is Ben Brown. My current role is Senior Special Security Operations Manager at Microsoft. Within that role, I oversee security operations, doctrine and policy generation, and general risk management for a specific portfolio of data centers. Historically, I've worked in finance, critical infrastructure, aerospace, and a number of other specific sectors in security, and have also volunteered on a number of ASIS councils and as a former chapter chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And now over to Sarah. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Head of Information and Cybersecurity for the UK Department of Transport, which means basically the CISO. I'm also the winner of a Young Cyber Professional on the Outstanding Security Performance Awards this year, so no pressure on me. And my career span the civil service and also private sector and banking.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. So Cyber was award winner in December. Okay, thank you very much indeed, panel. So without further ado, we're going to come to each of you and ask you for your opening statements. 3 minutes when we get to hear what you've got to say about this subject matter. Richard, your opening statement first, please.
Thanks, Martin. So I think the key question with this discussion generally is the use of the word "we" in the sentence, because who is we exactly? And I think, in terms of the people on this call and the panelists today, I think we very much care about young security professionals. However, I think if you look at the broader industry, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, if I'm going to be really honest with you. Never have there been so many opportunities for people to come into this industry. And I think that has both created a real opportunity for us, but also has really grayed the waters somewhat. In terms of, and I think where I'm going with that is the definition of the security industry in itself is at times actually quite unclear. It's at the best, it's very broad, and at the worst, it's almost impossible to quantify. There are so many different streams, specialities. I mean, if you think about, I mean, if the three of us on this panel today, our roles are all wildly different in terms of what we do and how we go about them. You look at all the different sectors, you know, where do you even begin? So I think the educational opportunities and the volume of entry-level positions, and this is again assuming that we're talking about young professionals who may be sort of, you know, young in age and young in experience, are now hugely significant. There is still huge debates about the actual career paths available. If you look at salary disparity, if you look at career paths, the routes to success, what does that actually look like for a lot of young security professionals? And how much are businesses and associations willing to invest in these people to actually make, to succeed in the industry and to push forward? So I think industry associations, I know I'm talking slightly biased because obviously I'm on the ASIS board, but if you look at the likes of ASIS, the Security Institute, the ISRM, amongst others, I think we've got a huge part to play in terms of raising the awareness of young professionals, in terms of doing some mentoring, in terms of helping people and guide them through on their journey as they enter the industry and as they push forward. However, I think in terms of my opening statement, I think it's a very unclear situation. And I think when you look at the traditional career routes there were in security and you look at where we are today, I think we've got a lot of work to do as a sector to really show that we care and that we're willing to take people forward. Thanks, Martin.
Richard, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that. Let's go immediately to Ben. Ben, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. Richard, I agree that we're definitely in a transitional era where the industry is scaling significantly. The opportunities are changing a lot. I agree with you that generally we do care, right? That the support organizations, ASIS, SIA, IFPO, et cetera, have invested heavily in the young professional to enhance mentorship, certification, education, training, but I think where the drop-off here is in the workforce, where there isn't as much cohesion with employers due to disparities with how jobs are sought. We've taught young professionals how to seek employment, but we haven't really taught security management how to seek their talent. We see that in job descriptions where it isn't clear what we're looking to staff with security positions. We have kind of exclusionary experience requirements in a lot of job descriptions, looking for 5 to 10 years of experience for somewhat entry to supervisory level positions, weird degree requirements within the field, and kind of just some institutional issues that seem to exclude young professionals. I believe that's prevalent in credentials as well, where credentials have difficult eligibility requirements for young professionals to enter. And mentorship is another issue where I believe we talk a lot about mentorship. It's difficult to find mentors and often even harder to engage them once they're found. And I think we have a lot of opportunities for better support coming in the future along the lines of integrating with higher education within workforce hiring, giving young professionals greater representation in leadership to show that not just tenure is sought, that also individuals with a lot of promise and opportunity are also valued in the industry, and also showing greater representation and security with the demographics of our clientele. We have a lot of companies where young professionals are the large extent of the customer base, yet our security departments are not representative of that. So I believe that we have a lot of opportunity for campaigns to bring young professionals in more significantly in the industry.
Excellent, Ben. Thank you very much indeed. Also another set of good points. I appreciate it. We'll come back to those. Just to say to the audience, if you'd like to get your questions in early, please do use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen and we'll endeavour to come to you. Thirdly, let's go to Sarah. Sarah, your opening statement, please.
Yeah, so I agree with both Richard and Ben in terms of when you're setting a job description, it says 2 to 3 years, and that's for an entry-level role. You're straight out of school. How are you supposed to get that 2 to 3 years? When people say they want CISSP, CISM, that costs £3,000, £4,000 in my currency, probably about equivalent to that in dollars. How is somebody supposed to afford that when they're young? Do they know value that qualification, or do they just think it's a tick box exercise? And also, how do we get them to understand what skills are needed? What about transferable skills? Young people who started off in something else want to move into cyber, particularly after COVID and the recession. Are we missing out on skills bank just by saying we need you to have technical knowledge of this? about people who are very good at maybe risk analysis or maybe really good at seeing the overall picture? How do we bring them into your fold? And how do we make cyber attractive as a career to a wider range of people? So I know a couple of times as a female, I've been in a meeting where I've been the only female in a panel of 45, 50 people. How do we make sure that when we say young, it's not just we're focusing on one demographic, one area, but we're making it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible from as wide a range of backgrounds as possible? And what do we do about keeping those people in cyber? How do we make sure that they want to progress, that they can learn, that they aren't shut out of opportunities when somebody else has got 10, 15, 20 years extra experience from them? So some of the questions. What do we mean by we care? So I think as an industry, we do care. As professionals, we care. But do our employers feel the same way? Do our employers necessarily care about bringing those people in the same way as we do?
Yeah, and the implication is maybe not. We'll come to that in a minute. Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Okay, questions are flooding in, really good ones. So let's go first of all to Glenn Kitteringham, who's a former panelist. And Dr. Kitteringham asked the question for each of you, how you're defining young professionals. I'm going to start with you, Richard, because you mentioned the whole point about definitions. And it's a good point about the word young. I'm old, right? So I would have said young was, I've got a 22-year-old son. That's young. But of course, typically, sometimes we're talking about up to 40. So I'll ask each of you this question. I could give your thoughts. You first, Richard.
Yeah, there was actually a huge debate on a global outreach young professionals WhatsApp group that I think spanned probably the best part of 100 messages the other day on this exact question. I think it's a bit of a loaded gun, if I'm honest, this question, because everyone's going to have an opinion. To my mind, and the traditional, funnily enough, stance in security has been anyone under the age of 40. Don't ask me where that came from, but that tends to be how it's been seen. I think, to be honest, a young professional is generally either somebody young in age who typically will be in their first career anyway, so it's irrelevant. And I think it's someone who's coming into the industry but who doesn't maybe have the experience, or maybe coming in slightly later, but it is coming into the security industry by whatever means. I think, though, the stereotypical answer to that question is generally somebody younger in age, but I do think it can be either. And for the benefit of this discussion, it should be seen as either.
Okay, I mean, Ben, would you accept someone who's 39 is young?
Within the context that Richard raised, yeah, I do agree that there are some people coming off different career paths that are still young in our field, and even in their career.
And so, were you happy with the definition there? I mean, is it okay to be flexible? Because it just strikes me, Ben, that one of the problems is, back to this definition, unless we're precise, then it's woolly and people are going to find it difficult to talk about meaningfully. I mean, is there not a case of saying we all agree as young professionals it is? Ben.
Difficult to talk about? Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to put a nail in the head of what is young, what constitutes a young professional, but I think there are wide boundaries to the definition, as Richard said.
But if I was to put you on the spot, if I might, what would you give me as the upper age of acceptable young?
I've definitely heard the 40 mark, as he mentioned.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Sarah, are you okay with 40 being the age band at which young ends?
In terms of you need a cut off somewhere, you could put it at any age. I'd more say young in terms of, are you confident in yourself in terms of your knowledge, your skill set? Could you mentor somebody else? Do you feel you got the experience that if somebody asks you to do something, you know how to go away and do it, find out where to do it, find out how to do it? If not, could you still be classed as young? It's difficult to put an age limit on it when you might have a 39-year-old wanting to transition into cyber.
Well, exactly. So my point is, so that's an argument for saying we need to come together and be a lot clearer what it is, full stop. Would you be in favour of that? Is that acceptable to you to do that?
Yeah, I think so, as long as we work out what we're actually going to do once we've set that definition. So we're going to bring a definition in, and then what do we do with it once we've done it?
Yeah, okay. Well, look, we're going to come back to this, I'm sure, because it's a protocol. I'm interested, though, and I feel slightly pleased that you answered the way you did, because in the OSPAs around the world, we've been using Forti, and I struggle with it myself. I must say, I'm always a bit nervous about whether it's acceptable. You three have given it credibility, so thank you very much indeed for that. Let me move to the next question, though. And Sarah, you mentioned the cost of qualifications in your talks. Let me come to you with the first question from John Reeves. He says, I fully support the increased diversity the recruiting of young professionals brings to the industry, especially with so many ex-police and ex-military currently in place. But do security qualifications make up for the lack of relevant experience, especially when considering management roles? And I wonder whether I could extend that, Sarah, to your point about security qualifications, because they're expensive and there's quite a lot of them. To what extent, if we got a problem here in terms of career development with the issue about what qualifications are available? Sarah first, then I'll come to you, Ben.
So I think we do have an issue in terms of the job descriptions asking for the kind of triage of qualifications, CISMP, CISSP, and not necessarily recognising the value that you can get from experience, or that you might have done another qualification. So you might have done mathematics, be really good at looking at logarithms or something, which you can then translate into looking at your Seams log, etc. So if we focus too much on qualifications, we ignore transferable skills and experience. And it also means that some people can't actually do qualifications. Some people suffer from kind of dyslexia, the traditional model of you go into an exam room for 3 hours, you sit for exam. It doesn't really apply to them. So I think it's looking at what theory do those qualifications teach you, and is there a blended learning where you learn on a job and you get your qualification as part of that experience? Is that a better way of doing it?
Okay, interesting. Ben, over to you. Your thoughts about qualification. I'm interested in whether they're fit for purpose, really, Ben, as a young professional.
I'm kind of split on this topic. I hold the CPP, and I do think they are valuable. They articulate, similarly to education, a willingness to try and persevere and take time and invest in the subject matter, but I don't think they're exclusively mandatory. My chief security officer does not hold them. I don't think they're a example of competency necessarily. I think they're icing on the cake, just as different qualifications and education are. But I do think they've shown investment in the industry and our craft. So I think they have their place, but I don't think they should be used as a discriminatory factor in hiring.
Okay, interesting. That's very interesting first two answers, actually. You know, I thought there might be a ringing endorsement. Richard, are you? Where do you stand on this?
Well, I think, again, it's a difficult one, and it's the old paradox, isn't it, of you're young and you haven't got them, or you're slightly older and you've got them, and which way do we go with it? And you know, this is the oldest discussion: education versus experience. We're almost going to go down that road. I think, from my point of view, it's always about a blended approach. There's no one size fits all with qualifications. You can have every certification under the sun and still not have much of an idea of what you're doing, and vice versa. You can have years and years of experience and do an amazing job and not hold a single certification. So I think there's always going to be people that sit both sides of the fence or possibly on it. From my perspective, if you're a young professional, it sometimes helps to gain these certifications or qualifications. And again, that's another important one because there's a big difference between the two. But because they can help validate you, they can help get your foot in the door, they can help get you through recruitment algorithms and systems and what have you. And I think there are opportunities out there for scholarships, for training bursaries and what have you, that will inevitably end up with that will inevitably end up helping people get opportunities to access these if funding is an issue. So there's no again, we want straight answers, and there isn't one with this, but I think most people successfully navigate this with a blend of the two, versus, and again, it's how you sell yourself, how you put yourself forward, and the experiences you've gained so far through education before work and your current experience that will get you through.
Okay, very, very good. Let me just come to a few comments. Andrew Knight emphasised the point about talking about a profession rather than an industry. Ben Surd, who knows a bit about young professionals, says that we should put the age limit at 30. By the way, talking about scholarships, Ben's in charge of ACES Foundation scholarships available from the 1st of February world. So look out for those. Ben's in charge of them, actually. Andrew Knight says at the age of 35, you could be a mentor with a skill set, help younger people, but also still be training at a new level where you're receiving support, presumably giving credence to those who are 35. Let me move on then. Ben, I'm going to come to you first. And a question from Dennis Shepp, an important one, Ben, because Dennis's question is about, if I can pick the point I really want to pick about his question. Dennis is also a former panelist and has made the point that you were critical or you raised issues about the way young professionals were hired in the first place. And I wonder how we begin to influence the hierarchies in organisations. I mean, all of you have picked up on points which, if we're to address, means changing the views of hierarchies and the way they perceive young people and the way they engage people in a career. I'm going to ask you each now to give your just thoughts on the major barriers here to doing that well and what we need to do. I'm going to start with Ben, then come to Sarah, then Richard. Ben first.
The major barriers with influencing leadership. I think it's similar to Richard's introduction, that we're just kind of seeing a cultural shift where the current chief security officers in the industry, degrees didn't exist in this field at the time when they entered the industry. A lot's changed since then. Certifications have advanced significantly. The young professionals communities didn't exist at that time. I think that's slowly changing through immersion in conferences and literature and venues such as this webinar. I'm not sure how to directly target that, but it's slowly percolating over time.
I guess the point is, though, Ben, in many ways, this is a biggie, isn't it? Because you've raised the point about the perception of security in the first place. But all of you in different ways have pointed out about the process of, organizations can choose the way they behave. But ultimately, it's about the people in charge thinking differently. And as you rightly say, Ben, when they joined, it was a different world. I mean, then it was much more heavily police and military. Qualifications weren't really necessary at all. It's about the process of engaging, and it's a tricky one, I guess. Okay, let me come to Sarah. Sarah, your thoughts on this? You raised this in your opening statement.
Yeah, so I'm quite lucky in the UK civil service in that there was actually things such as applicant blind recruitment, where on the CV they take out ages of qualifications, so you can't put your date you did your degree or anything like that. So that takes out an element of that potential bias if it's there in the first place. And there's also things like reverse mentoring, where members of the senior levels get paired with more junior staff and get them to highlight the experience and things as they face around that, and including young members of your staff on the interview panels. So making sure your interview panels, your selection panels are diverse, and saying, okay, for each panel you have to have somebody at one of the more junior grades to join it to be involved in the selection. It's a good way of doing things, I think.
That happens in the civil service, you're saying, Sarah?
Yes.
Now, here's an interesting thing, because I stand back and hear that and think, well, that's just fantastic. I mean, does it work? I mean, are there any problems with it?
It seems to work well. I mean, I've got members of my team that range from the 40s down to kind of mid-20s, etc. I think it's just learning the application process and learning how to apply for jobs, etc. But I wouldn't say that's unique to civil service.
No, okay.
Application questions, how you do a supporting statement. That's where we find a little bit of difficulties.
Well, it's not unique, but on the other hand, it's not common in the security sector for sure. So it is an interesting approach. Richard, you hear that? What's your thoughts on this?
I think what Sarah said's great. I think reverse mentoring is a fantastic concept, and probably not enough organisations do it. Probably because they might not like what would be the output of it, or they're scared of what might be the output of it.
What do you mean by that, Richard? Just explain what you mean by scared.
Well, I think sometimes people in positions of authority, in a situation like this, may have stereotypical or slightly rigid views on how things should be, or there's the old mantra, we've always done it this way. And I think sometimes if a young professional in certain organizations and industries certainly was to put their hand up above the parapet and say, well, actually, this is okay, or we should think about this, or we should have a different viewpoint, or we should consider a different viewpoint, that may not get taken in the best possible context. So I think that's why it's what I would call a disruptor. It's a nice idea, and it injects some new ideas. I think going to your question, I think it's extremely difficult to influence. I think some organizations are more open to it than others. But I think what's important is that, as part of, the industry associations, the wider security profession. I think someone put on the chat earlier about the security profession rather than the security industry. And I think that's super important as well, that we all stakeholders seek to influence and engage and make people aware that actually, young professionals may well be more than suitably qualified at an earlier stage than may otherwise be thought so. But as the next generation of people start to step up into the CSO positions, into the deputy CSO positions or CISO positions, we need to remember where we've come from, and so that we then take it with us, so that we may not seek to change or disrupt everything today, but that the CSOs of tomorrow have a newer viewpoint, and therefore that will have a positive effect also on the YPs of tomorrow as well. So I think it's both a short and a long-term journey.
Yeah, interesting. I want to just ask you a question now, and I'll come to you first, Sarah. A question from Mike Gibbs. Mike's also been a panelist in the past, and Mike wants to twist this completely. And Mike's point is that is there a point upon which actually it's become very, very good for young professionals these days? The problem is if you're 60, they're getting rid of you because you're old and expensive, and they're bringing in young people that actually, this is the era of the young professional. They've never had it so good. I'm slightly building on what Mike said, but he inspired this question. Sarah, any thoughts on that?
Again, it depends what we mean by young. So if we're just going by age, you could probably argue either way in terms of if you're looking at work history, experience, if you're looking at can you upskill, can you retrain, are you just as new to profession? It's equally as tricky. I'd say young people, there's a tendency that they're usually thought of as cheaper, which is why they're brought in, but that also ignores the skills. It's a little bit kind of, if you're treating it as young in terms of experience, give those old people the same training opportunities and see how they can learn from each other.
Okay, I mean, Ben, here's the point I want to make. Young people have never had it so good. Young professionals in the security sector, it's now rosy. There's lots of young people. You've got yourself together. You're on award schemes. You're representative in all the major associations. They're focusing on you. It's the old people who are missing out now, Ben.
There's lots of
I'll go Ben on this if I could. Ben?
I think to Sarah's point, that goes both ways. Age is only one facet of this. And the key, just with all your previous webinars here, is inclusion, right? And equity. This isn't meant to push one group out, it's just about creating a diverse workforce that's capable of being fluid and adaptive and representative of the customer.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, in your sense, Ben, I mean, it sounds a very modern thing to say that, right? It's a sort of in type of vibe that you need to sort of have the same group as your client group. I just don't hear it so much within the security sector. I mean, when I listen to the major news programs in the morning, I hear that on the business program, which I listen to most mornings, but not in the security sector. Do you think that perhaps that's the problem, that you've got yourself together as young professionals, but there's still more work to be done in changing attitude in what is a very old male, white male dominated industry at the top?
Mm-hmm. Significantly. I watched your Women in Security one from earlier last year. Same kind of parallels that we're seeing. Your most previous one with the LGBTQ and disabled. That's a even more challenging pathway currently in the industry. I think the point in general is to be more holistic as an industry or profession. similar to what other professions already have gone through in the past.
And do you think the task then is more difficult because of the type of background of former leaders and
Absolutely.
the type of? Okay, I mean, one of the questions Dirk points Dirk Pitchell, I hope I pronounced that right, Dirk, has made, is that, of course, as was said earlier, as people get into leadership positions, they can begin to change their perception as they progress through the ranks. And I suppose that's what we must hope for. That's the next step. Ben?
To me, yeah, absolutely.
And do you see that happening? I mean, do you see that sort of trend taking place? Theoretically, yes. Is it happening?
To some degree, yeah.
Ah, you see, this is my senses. It's still route to go. Richard, are you more hopeful?
Yeah, and I think I am hopeful. Someone's just made a great point actually on the chat, but I think yes, in terms of attitudes changing, I agree. I think as we're moving through, I think attitudes are starting to change throughout organisations. I think it's a really interesting point around perceptions and around, you know, have the young professionals had it so yeah, we have got it better than we've ever had it, but it's not all rosy in the rose garden. We've still got huge challenges in terms of, as I said, getting people through, getting people engaged, mentored, interested, and you know, and making sure that they feel valued as part of those organizations and those support elements are available. And I think there's a lot of work to do at higher levels in organizations to raise the profile of young professionals. Because in many organizations, it's still the same old thing. It's still being done in the same way. That said, I do think there are challenges on all fronts. So I don't think it's to say that one group's got it any better than the other. But I think young professionals have shone in many ways throughout the pandemic. But I think there's a lot more work to do in terms of the inclusivity and the support as we move forward.
Yeah, and you're right, because Ben raised a good point, actually. We did have a webinar a couple of weeks ago where we looked at the disabled and sexual orientation and the sort of discrimination, informal discrimination against those groups. Or perhaps a way of putting it would be the non-full acceptance of the contribution they make. So it's not just about being young here. It's about the sector, isn't it? And the image it's got. Sarah, I just want to check, did you want to come back in on a comment? I cut you off when Ben was speaking. Sarah?
Yeah, so I was just going to add around that when they were saying kind of, is it skewed? I don't necessarily think it is skewed either way. So it's more about giving opportunity to everyone. But in terms of young people, it's also that image of cybersecurity and what is cybersecurity to them, because a lot of the time we'll get that image from films, from TV, of somebody kind of a lot older than them, just doing a lot of tech on a computer. Do they actually know what it means in practice? Have they got that support, etc. in place? So feeding in with what Richard said, yes, it's probably better than it was, but we could still do a lot more.
And I suppose the other thing, Sarah, it's interesting you should speak about cyber, because it just strikes me that in some ways cyber is a lot more attractive, the image of cyber, than is of the security sector more generally, where there is this image. I mean, people tend to think of the security officer, the security guard, which is greatly enhanced and greatly improved over the years, but it still struggles with that reputational issue in a way that cyber less so. Would you agree with that, or is that not your interpretation on the inside?
Elements of cyber. So I'd say things such as hacking, ethical hacking, pen testing, etc. the attractive bits people probably don't know about, such as want to maintain the servers, risk assessment, etc. Less so, not less, maybe because we don't give enough visibility to them.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on because I'm going to try and get more questions. Simon Chen, Richard, come to you. There is this point, Richard. Well, I did a study a couple of years ago with colleagues here in Perpetuity on career paths. We spoke to a number of people about it. And when we spoke to people in the security sector, one of the most intriguing things of all was one of the main reasons is, why did you join security? I fell into it by chance. That was a disproportionately big answer. Are you going to stay in it? Yes, really interesting world to be in. Opportunity to serve the public, interestingly, can be lucrative. often not perception, but as you get further up the scale, there's certainly a chance to be lucrative. But Simon, I don't know that's the, I don't think that's the perception. And Simon Chan raises this issue about the ability in security to use transferable skills from other sectors. And given the fact that security is about being in business, there's a lot of opportunity for that. And I just wonder, Richard, whether the perception of security gets in way of the opportunity. And do you agree it's an opportunity? Richard?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting stance to come out. I'm unfortunately in the fell into it by accident category, so I hear you there. I think from my perspective, there's a lot of opportunity to transfer into the industry. I'm not from any one particular background, one over the other. So I think, you know, I came into the industry with a really mixed set of skills and experiences, and I've put them to use throughout, because a lot of what in the sector I'm in, a lot of it's around communication, a lot of it's around engagement, a lot of it's about understanding and troubleshooting. So, you know, it's not so much around, you know, the technical element you can teach, but you can't necessarily teach charisma. And I think that or personality. So I think that's hugely important. So I think there is huge, but I go back to one of the earlier points which was around what is the definition of security, and I think that's the problem. I think people, when they think security, they either think of, you know, people on their computers, you know, hacking something, or they think of guards, gates, and dogs. And I think we've got to move away from those very stereotypical definitions. And again, that's an education piece, industry, profession, industry, whatever you want to call it, wide. Because I think as long as people think that's what the industry or the profession is, it's going to be just that. So I think we need to get away from that. And then when people realize that actually it's a huge number of different facets, it's a huge number of different opportunities exist, I think more people will be inclined to get involved.
Okay, Ben, did you happen to fall into the security sector by chance, or were you aching to join it?
Absolutely. Yeah, this was the quick, easy opportunity after the military, and as you mentioned, a lot of transferable both hard and soft skills.
Yeah, and was that an easy route for you to make? I mean, I guess
it was.
Right.
It was. And of course, I similarly, as Richard mentioned, didn't know of what depths existed in the field beyond guards, gates, and guns.
Yeah.
And I think that is a major barrier for us to enlighten those seeking employment, that this is a tremendously large field with a lot of different interesting opportunities.
Yeah, okay. And it's interesting you should say it coming from the military, because you might be thinking you had a better perspective than most on the possibilities, in the sense it was... Sarah, did you fall into this by chance, or did you go on?
I did fall into it. So I actually came from a knowledge and information management background. So I trained as an archivist, records professional, worked in that for most of my career, and then was given cyber, but fell under my remit. And realised that there's a lot of crossover, a lot of synergy. But if you looked at things maybe from an information risk angle as opposed to a technical angle, you could actually contribute a lot to cyber. So I did actually do the whole transferable skills, transferable experience.
Okay, thank you. Listen, I've got a question for all of you. I'll start with you, Ben. It's from Javan Simpson. And Javan says, in terms of continuity, sharing of knowledge and preventing big age experience gap, what would be the #1 recommendation to engage and retain young persons? Now, that's a really good question. So just thinking of a strategic level, what does the sector need to do? The profession, as Andrew Knights would want me to call it, what does it need to do in order to attract and retain? Headline issues, what's the answer? Ben first.
I think what is needed there is to integrate everyone on the staff, including the young professionals, into decision-making so that they are equally engaged in the path and the vision of the security apparatus in an organization, rather than simply waiting until they have the age and tenure to make decisions and have input that's valued.
I like that one, actually. And what's the barrier to doing that, Ben?
Company culture. I think some organizations are already doing that. Okay,
you know of people who are doing that well.
Mm-hmm.
That's positive. That's positive. Sarah, your thoughts on this? Headline issues, what we do to attract and retain young people.
In terms of retaining them, challenge them, push them. So if there's a task that you'd normally give to somebody who's been in your organisation 20 years just because you know they can do it, why don't you give it to that young person, train them through, talk them through it, get them to work with that individual and learn, and give them something that's out of their comfort zone, that's challenging, that they feel they're actually making a difference and learning and developing those skills to move upwards. In terms of bringing them in, it's making sure we identify what your barriers are to them joining in the first place. Are we making it visible as a profession that we want them to join? Are we advertising in schools? Are we send careers advisors? Can you actually talk to them about cyber? Can you bring in people who can talk about it? When you're at university, I don't know, but you actually get pushed into cyber. I don't remember a careers person coming in to talk about it, except in terms of people who are new to the industry, helping them work out where their skills can help us, where their skills are valuable. Maybe they can sit down with a mentor and say, I'm experiencing that. How does that apply to cyber? What skills can I bring to your table? How can you help me tailor that for when I'm applying to jobs?
Yeah, it sounds an easy thing to do, and of course it's so important, and yet there's a whole process of education and engagement that needs to take place. Okay, thank you very much. Richard, I want to know what your headline strategic issues. This is an important question. It's a good one to ask you.
I think it's. I think again, it's at all levels of the organisation. I think sort of Sarah and Ben have both alluded to the fact that organisations need to help with opening those doors to enabling young professionals to step up to the parapet a bit sooner than maybe they would do. To maybe looking at the hiring frameworks, maybe looking at the recruitment policies, and looking even down to the roles they're recruiting in terms of looking at what do they actually need, and opening these opportunities. But also, I'm going to maybe be slightly controversial in the sense of, I think if we can mentor young professionals or the next generation in the most positive way, I think YPs also have a duty to step forward and to push themselves. It's all very well, not everything can always be laid on a silver plate, and many of us have progressed in our careers because we've not been prepared to stand still and just been given these opportunities. We've really pushed hard. We've not waited to get our foot in the door. We've kicked the door open. So I think sometimes part of mentoring is about engaging with young professionals, engaging with next generation leaders, and instilling the confidence in them to push on, to get themselves in a position where they can make a difference in an organisation. So I think it has to come from both sides. I don't think it's all on the leadership or the perceived leadership. I think it needs to come from the YPs as well to have that confidence to step forward. And that's where I think as an industry, we can all work with young professionals to instill that confidence and help push them forward.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting to speak about mentoring, by the way. The webinar in about 2 or 3 weeks' time, I'll come to it in a minute, is actually on mentoring. So we'll no doubt revisit some of the issues there. Thank you very much indeed, panel. Absolutely fantastic. I've got to say to you, as an old man now, and been in the security sector all these years, if there's one group it strikes me that have got their act together, it's young professionals. Over my career, I've seen that associations are now onto it, and young people are coming together a lot more. I mean, so much more to do, but it does strike me as a group who have made good progress. So basically, then I know from the OSPAs how good some young professionals are. So thank you very much indeed, panel. Thank you very much indeed. Questions. A few final points from me, if I might. Just to remind you that on Monday, a copy of this webinar and indeed the blog to go with it will be on the website. OSPAs around the world, they're open in Kenya. They're open in Nigeria. TECA's open on the 28th of March. Cyber OSPAs on the 11th of April. We go through it all over again. Doesn't it come around quickly? Just to say, the next OSPA event is the UK OSPAs. I've got to tell you, this is you better buy your ticket quick because we're nearly at sellout. Incredible response. Biggest number of entries ever. Big black tie dinner. Night out on the 24th of February in the afternoon. Listen to this, a thought leadership summit. We've got some of the most pressing issues facing the security sector, some of the leading speakers, a physical event in London. If you're about in London, do make sure you come to that, and you can register below. Okay, finally to say, we're back at the normal time of Thursday next week, when the topic's fraudulent degrees and qualifications. I didn't tell you something. I didn't realise till I prepared this webinar just how big a problem fraudulent degrees and qualifications is, building on something that was said earlier today. So that's next week. Then on the 17th of February, you'll note mentoring, does it work? Is the security sector good at it? We'll be speaking about that in a few weeks. So thank you once again to my panel. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you to the audience for your question. I'm sorry we didn't get through everything. Thank you to Sarah Gray in the background, who's looked after all the technology. It's Friday afternoon, so let me say to you, have a good weekend, and I'll hopefully see you next Thursday. But until we meet again, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.